Although they say it's a nice town now, you can
Yeah.
still affordable. You can get something. All right, let's see. And here we go. Charles Moscowitz. Thanks for joining me. Michael D. Shaw is here. He's a chemist by trade. He's an author of medical articles I think he's up to 1,000 articles now over a 10, 15-year period. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Hey, always a pleasure.
So, Mike, we've been talking about the election and what could be more important right now. Um, I see at this point three paths forward for President Trump, one of which would be very perilous. What?
Right? No, I was going to say that's more than I see, but
Well, let me just outline them, one of which would be perilous and dangerous. The first two more conventional paths is that even though the Supreme Court seems like, in my opinion, it is somewhat compromised. I've heard some stories coming out of there that don't bode well. Nevertheless, they have in front of them 6 or 7 cases that are on the docket,
right.
4 of which are from Sidney Powell. Those are filled with evidence of massive voter fraud, including testimony and affidavits and pictures and video, and they're just an extraordinary presentation. And then others include one that's still active in Pennsylvania regarding the fact that bureaucrats had changed the laws to help Biden, and they did so behind the back of the legislature, which is unconstitutional. I think that Attorney Lynn Wood has one going in Georgia. And my good friend, Dr. Jerome Corsi, along with Larry Klayman, who I interviewed yesterday, they have one that's now lodged at the Supreme Court, a general legal theory that voids the election. I don't know how far it'll go, but it's there. And if the Supreme Court takes even one of these, then that's going to open up the whole question of voter fraud. Now, the second course involves, on January 8th, I believe the Constitution says that the electors vote and their votes are counted, and the president is declared a winner based on that vote.
In front of Congress.
In front of Congress.
Right.
But if one U.S. congressman and one senator stands up and objects, then it goes into the House, and you have each state appoint one delegate. And when I say each state, I'm talking each state legislature, not governor, not anyone else. And the Republicans control 31 state legislatures. So that means that Donald Trump will be reelected. Now, as of now, there is one congressman who has stepped up, that being Mo Brooks of Arizona.
Well, what about a senator?
Well, that's the question. Where all these senators pounding their chests and bloviating like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Marsha Blackburn, who's been on my program. There were a bunch of conservative senators, Lindsey Graham. There are several conservative senators. Now we're going to see what they're made of. We're going to see whether or not they can stand up. Now, apparently this was attempted during the Bush-Gore controversy, when the Bush-Gore delegates voted on January of the year 2000, I think it was, yeah.
Right.
Or 2001. There was a congressman who apparently stepped up and challenged it, but they couldn't get a senator. So the whole thing went down in flames. So that is the second option. The third option is a lot less palatable and is a dangerous and perilous course. And that is that, given the fact that we now have evidence from Antrim County in Michigan, that and it's irrefutable. They sent in a team of cyber experts who were not political people. They just were experts at the order of a local judge who responded positively to a lawsuit brought by local citizens in Antrim County. Antrim County, we should recall, had 6,000 votes switched from Trump to Biden, and also some local races, and that the Secretary of State claimed that it was human error. She claimed that it was...
That's some error.
Yeah, right, exactly. But that turned out to be untrue, because the forensic audit proved that it was the machines who did it, that the machines had been rigged, that they had been set up in advance, and that they were online. So with that kind of evidence, now you have other jurisdictions doing audits of their machines, including one in Georgia and one in Arizona. And I think that under this guise, President Trump has enough evidence to trigger the Insurrection Act, which was signed by executive order. So it's not totally, it could be questioned, but it was signed in 2018. That basically says that if there was foreign interference or domestic interference in an election, then the president could declare a semi-state of martial law and seize these machines across the board, have them all forensically audited, and even suspend the election. Now, this is a perilous course, of course, and that the president would have to go before Congress and present the evidence, and go before the country in the form of media and present the evidence. And it very well could lead to having another election. I mean, it's an extreme measure, and it's one that could also backfire in a big way, in that Trump could be placed under house arrest for that if the country doesn't cooperate, and it doesn't look like it will. So, those are the three options. What do you think?
Yeah, all right. Well, the third one is very extreme.
Right.
And I think the problem here, which was well indicated by the Supreme Court's inaction, is, and I said before, nobody wants to be the guy, all right, that's going to overturn this. The Supreme Court, in my judgment, has been mostly a farce almost since its inception. Most of the so-called classic decisions that everybody likes were strictly political. And as I pose this to people, if you were a distinguished attorney, would you A, take a job for $200,000 a year, or make maybe 5 to 6 times that or more in a firm? And why are you choosing the federal judiciary? Well, maybe you like the prestige, maybe you like the lifetime appointment, maybe you're kind of lazy, and all the above. So my point is, that's exactly the wrong resume for someone to take a stand. How much easier is it to sit back and move the paperwork? So whether you're Amy Barrett or any of the others, I'm unimpressed. This was the one time they could have stepped up, but instead they didn't want to get their robes dirty. And where this thing was truly ironic is that the liberals, of course, didn't want to have anything to do with it, but then the conservatives didn't either, because you see, under a strict construction basis, we don't want to really rock the boat to such an extent. So that's DOA. I mean, I think the only thing that really is going to happen is if Mo Brooks can get a senator. Here again, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of fire-breathing senators.
Right.
But we will see. My take is that it won't happen because, again, this is a cliche now, Ted Cruz doesn't want to be the guy.
Marsha Blackburn, maybe?
Well, it would be interesting if the guy ends up being a woman, and maybe she doesn't care about any future career.
Well, that's it. You have to have somebody who just has such strong principles that they're willing to not only forfeit their future, but they're actually willing to put their life and their family's life at risk, because it's a very dangerous
She's
situation.
the most likely, I think.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's going to happen, I don't know. I mean, they have till January 8th.
You have to have somebody like that. I mean, I'll point to an example recently, and that is my friend and regular guest in this program, Dr. Jerome Corsi. Now, Dr. Corsi was called before the Mueller group, we may remember,
Yes,
these groups of brown shirts. And they said to him, he said, you say what we want you to say, and you'll be fine. If you don't, we're going to put you in jail. And basically, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And Corsi said, look, I'm in my late 70s. I'm not in the greatest of health. I've lived a good, honest life. I'm not going to start lying now. I'm at peace with my Lord, and I don't care. I'm ready to go to jail because I ain't doing it. And he stood up to them. And I think that was not the only, but one of the final nails in the coffin of that whole rotten conspiracy to try to prove that Donald Trump is spying for the Russians. And it was shortly after that they closed shop. So
funny how that worked out that way, huh?
Yeah, well, that's right. And that's what we need now. We need a Jerome Corsi. I don't mean to exalt Dr. Corsi. I admire him. I'm not saying he's some saint, but he did stand up at that time. He did put everything on the line. And we need to have somebody in this country who's willing to do that in the Senate. And if that happens, then it'll fly. As far as the Supreme Court goes, I think I mentioned last time, Mike, what I heard on Jeff Kuhner's program. Did I? Or maybe not.
Sure. I don't know.
Well, Jeff Kuhner is a Boston talk show host, WRKO. He's an excellent host. He's been around for a long time. He's a former professor from McGill University. He's Canadian. He became an American citizen. He was the editor of the Washington Times for a number of years. He's just, in my opinion, a very good and very solid and credible source. And he says that there is a tape of a conversation that took place in the Supreme Court by a clerk who probably needs to remain nameless, because if he or she is named, they could be in big trouble. But they recorded John Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, basically calling to the carpet the three Trump judges, those being Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. And when I say calling them down, banging the table, every kind of threatening word, expletives, you effing this and effing that, you're juniors, I'm the Chief Justice, you do what I say, and threats, and that they could not go along with the Texas case, which is why they all caved. Now, again, I don't know if that's true.
Well, here's the problem with that. What power does he have? It's a lifetime appointment.
Well, that's just it. Maybe they are playing in the big leagues over there, and maybe there were threats made to them and their families. I don't mean to exaggerate here, but there's a lot on the line with this. And Roberts is I would suggest a conspirator at best.
Well, Roberts is damaged goods. I mean, the story going around for years that the kids that he adopted was done illegally. But it's so well known that I don't even know why that's a threat. But
it is a threat. Let me just talk about that briefly. In that, when Obama, everyone knows that Obama was a control freak who was spying on everybody and eavesdropping all over the world. I mean, Angela Merkel wanted to have him brought up on charges at the UN. She was so angry when she found out that he was bugging her phone. He would spy on friends and enemies, and he continued spying. We know that he was involved in the Pfizergate scandal.
Yeah.
Well, apparently people that were connected to him were eavesdropping on Roberts' emails, private emails. And they found out that, yes, Roberts and his wife adopted 2 children from Ireland, and that the Irish laws around adoption are very strict, and that there might have been some questions about the legality of that adoption, and that when this information was presented to Roberts, which was a threat, it just was a bridge too far for him and his wife. They did not want to lose those 2 children.
What the details were, as I was told, is that the paperwork was dinked so that it appeared that they were adopted from Peru.
Oh, okay.
And the only trouble with that story is that everybody knows that story. So why it's still a bargaining chip, I don't know. But I think some other pressure may have been put on this guy, because he, to me, looks like the ultimate weasel and tool.
Well, the other thing is, and this is not really relevant in today's terms either, but Larry Klayman, who was on my show yesterday, and who, he's the founder of Judicial Watch. He's brought several lawsuits that are pretty significant. He says that Roberts is a closeted homosexual who in his generation was a real no-no. I mean, by today, no one really cares, but
Yeah.
that he's being blackmailed for that. Although I don't know if he'd be, feel blackmailed over that at this point.
I think that pressure was put on him, which he attempted to exert on the three conservatives. And, more's the pity if that's true.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, and they still could have said no. They could have stood up. Whatever happened to Amy Barrett? We all had such high hopes,
Yeah, well, it was hopes.
The other two, I don't know, but I mean, she was somebody that we thought had some stones.
But Charles, this was the test. This was the test, and they failed. Okay.
Yep, that's right. Although they still have a few bites at the apple, there are still 7 cases.
Well, are they gonna stand up on those cases?
Well, that's the question. And there was still a lot of agitation. The other thing that we haven't talked about is the fact that on Monday, when the delegates were chosen by the states, there was a slate of alternative delegates chosen in 5 states, including New Mexico, apparently. See, I think it's 6 states that even though those Republicans that were elected don't have any official standing, nevertheless, the very fact that this happened shows that they are contesting those races.
They had to get on record contesting it.
Well, yeah, and I guess this had happened once before in 1960 in Hawaii, where a delegation, even though Hawaii had voted for Nixon, a Kennedy delegation was elected as an alternative delegation. And I think it also happened in 1948 with a Strom Thurmond, I believe, or there was some other example of this. So it's not unprecedented in American history that these delegates who are alternative delegates are sort of in a condition of standby. And it means that technically, I think, and again, I'm not a lawyer here, but at least by theory, legally, those states are still in contest. They are still not completely, clear in terms of whom they're sending to the delegate, in terms of the delegation. And that I think all of those states have Republican legislatures. The Republican legislatures can still exert their constitutional authority and pick their own electors. I think that there are several good state elected officials who are waking up to this fact. There's this guy in Pennsylvania, Mastriano. There's one in Arizona, Finchley. There are a couple of others who are coming out and realizing that their office holds certain legal powers and that they can exercise those powers. So I think if public pressure is brought to bear, then they very well may do that. And there is growing public pressure. In Arizona, there is Maricopa County, which is most of the state of Arizona. There was some major problems. Same thing in Nevada, in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. And I think that Pennsylvania is on fire. Georgia is on fire. The fraud is so obvious that these legislatures, which are all Republican, may be pushed in that direction still.
Well, I mean, the tell for me is that Biden has said exactly nothing about this. You would think that he would, to some extent, want to ensure, at least for public consumption, that this was all legit. And to simply ignore it may not be the right course for him. I think he's getting some pretty bad advice.
Well, I mean, the thing with him is that, and I don't know the answer to this question, but we now know that officially we've known it for a year. You and I have known it, but it's now come out in the mainstream media that Hunter Biden and James Biden and probably Joe Biden are being investigated by the FBI for tax fraud and for possible money laundering and other crimes. There was $400,000 that went unreported from Burisma. Now, this was kept under wraps by Barr, who was a complete traitor. The fact that he would do that, he wouldn't even tell Trump about it until after the election. But nevertheless, putting aside the fact that it vindicates Trump on the Ukrainian perfect phone call, because that whole thing was that Trump was trying to cook up a scandal to ensnare Biden and hurt him politically. and that it was made up and he was pressuring the Ukrainians, when in fact we now know it was absolutely true and had known that. Now it's being admitted after the election. My question is, why are they admitting it now? I mean, there was such a media blackout all the way up. And when it did come up in October, NPR came out with a public statement saying, we're not going to cover this.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other networks basically, and you could take a look, there's a good video on this, I think on YouTube, where they show like a succession of people, literally saying the same thing, which was that this was Russian disinformation. It was Russian propaganda, which we now know is a lie. And so my question is, why are they doing it now? I mean, do they have to do
I
it?
think I know why.
Why?
Because there's some joy in being intrinsically evil. And one of the cool things you can do is put it in our face. Hey, you know what? We did lie about this, and now we're coming out, and you.
So now, because they think the election is secure, they can get away with it.
Yeah, you can't do anything about it.
It's like the way the Boston Globe always operated every single election. They would keep bad news under wraps about their guy.
Yeah.
And then they'd wait until after the election and their guy is comfortably ensconced and has won. And then they wait till as Christmas approaches, they release the bad news. And there's a little day of gnashing of teeth and everybody forgets about it and gets involved in the holiday. I mean, maybe they thought that. They figured we're going to have to release this eventually. We might as well get it over with, go through a little tough spot, and then move on.
Yeah, well, I mean, apparently nothing can hurt them, no matter what you do.
But I think that could hurt them because I think it's expanding now. And now I've heard, and this is a rumor, I haven't actually seen this. Some people are claiming they have it, but Trump has declassified all of the WikiLeaks, and he's about to pardon Julian Assange.
Yeah, that
now, yeah, you've heard this.
Yeah.
And that's going to it's going to expand this scandal and it's going to ensnare further Hillary Clinton. According to this source, and again, I'm not here to confirm this, that she had taken an $18 million bribe just before the election. There's also there's a whistleblower involved in that, a very high level businessman who was privy to that. And other stuff that's sort of coming out of that's leaching out from the from the WikiLeaks. So, maybe this whole Hunter Biden thing is backfiring on them because it's opened a can of worms. And that now it's going to, there's calls for Trump, whether he stays or not, to appoint a special prosecutor to look into Biden's family. And if that happens, then whether Trump remains president or not, that prosecutor's office could be around for years. And there would be like another Mueller committee, although I don't think they're going to get the friendly treatment, of course, that Mueller got. I mean, with Mueller, I mean, every day there was like breaking bombshell, and then, I get them.
Well, the only problem with the special prosecutor is they better make sure it's not a U.S. attorney. It's going to have to be some regular Johnny Doorknob guy that isn't subject to the whims of the incoming president, who will often fire all the U.S. attorneys.
Right, that's true. So then, yeah, that's right. But there won't be the whole thing either way, no matter who it is, it'll be blackballed. There won't be any, you'll never hear from them. They'll be in Siberia.
Well, considering that, you've heard this figure a number of times, that 50% or more of the people believe there was fraud in the election.
More than 50. I think the last poll showed that it's up to almost 60% now. Okay. 85% Republicans, so about a third of Democrats.
How would you like to be the president coming in under those conditions?
Better. If they get rid of Trump, I don't think they care. I mean, they just, they figure they'll tough it out and they'll ride it out. They don't seem to care. I mean, it's, they'll smear their enemies. They'll use all of the old tools in the toolkit about how to stop it and how to defeat it. They may overstep themselves, in which case we're going to have people on the streets. The Trump movement is real. Trump probably won a landslide, and those are real people. Yeah. It's not going to go away. And if they're going to get nasty about it and start to smear people, I think there's going to be a big big
Oh,
reaction to
I
that.
truly believe there's going to be a huge overreach. There
Yeah.
always has been.
Well, that's how they usually do. I mean, they overreach themselves and they step in it. And if they are successful in this coup d'état, then yeah, I mean, it's gonna they better. I mean, I hope they don't stop marching in like Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, because it ain't gonna work.
No, I don't think so. And so much in the narrative is falling apart. I mean, on an unrelated but important issue, there was an article, I think, they come up today. Let me see. Yes, in American Thinker. I mean, not that this is news that
Right.
you've been
Okay.
following this, but that everything that they've closed in New York and LA and other places contributes de minimis to the spread of COVID. And 74% of cases, they're saying, come from within the home. So in other words, the exact advice that they're giving you to stay home is what's infecting people.
That makes sense because you're in an enclosed environment.
Yeah. So I have a feeling that even the liberals in New York, when there's no restaurants, are going to start objecting. There's been, let's say, peaceful protests about this. I'm not sure how much longer they're going to stay peaceful if people can't make a living because of this dictatorial actions of this government. There's a recall movement in California for Newsom.
Right.
There's recall movements all the time, but the last successful one was Gray Davis, and that's how we got Schwarzenegger back then.
Did they successfully take Davis out?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was really kind of sad because that was sort of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, everything that they were complaining about with Gray Davis was caused by Jerry Brown in the previous administration.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually met Gray Davis at of all places, Good Shepherd Church in Beverly Hills, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
and spoke to him for a couple of minutes. But he was a war hero. I mean, he was a liberal, but he was a war hero.
Right. A legitimate guy.
Yeah,
sure.
He had a pretty good resume in terms of political office, and he just got hammered because he inherited that stupid spot market power deal that had been brought in by Jerry Brown.
Mm-hmm.
So the state was going bankrupt, paying for power because, of course, they didn't build any plants, and that's when the rolling blackout started. So he was just happened to be the guy.
Right.
He was the captain of the Titanic at the moment.
I get it. Yeah, he inherited it.
Yeah. So there was a recall. He was gone, but there's a lot of people, and not just Republicans, that are getting real tired of Governor Gruesome or Nuisance or whatever they call him.
Yeah, same thing I think in Michigan with the Wicked Witch of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just bad news.
Interesting times. But then again, I wanted to say something about this issue of, well, what's happened? Why are so many of these people compliant? And why is there this huge liberal mentality that seems to certainly be in the mainstream? And I'm afraid it goes back to the dismantling of the educational system that started actually in the early 60s.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt that. I mean, and I think a lot of the people that hate Trump to the point where they're willing to commit crimes to try to stop him. These people who are counting the votes, these people who are putting Sharpies into machine voting so they can take the ballots out and then throw them out.
Right.
They can count them, so-called. These people are products of our rotten education system.
Well, I remembered something from when I was in the 10th grade, which was a long time ago. That was 1963. And I remember this incident that it was some world history, whatever it was. We're studying, among other things, Russia,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about communism. And then there was a little sidebar in the book that was titled, "What's Wrong with Marxism?" And it went into the standard points, erosion of incentive, and so on and so forth. Well, the student teacher stopped the proceedings, and you can see where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
It said, "Okay, class, what's wrong with Marxism?" And she goes in to start defending Marxism. And, I'm 15 years old. I'm kind of, all right. But for that attitude to come into this classroom where she was taking essentially that sort of pro-communist position in a public high school, I guess was a harbinger of something I didn't realize until much later was going on. And
now, was she like a student, like a fill-in, like a substitute teacher?
no, they had, I suppose in all school districts, she was studying at UCLA, and you have to do 1 or 2 semesters of student teaching. So she was one of these, very self-assured. I'm sure she was bright in her own way, but she had already been indoctrinated in college with this left-wing point of view, and is just like a virus that spread through the entire system. So it's almost like you can't really blame anybody under the age of what, 50?
Right.
For having these points of view, because that's all they were taught. Now, maybe some of them had the intellectual wherewithal to rebel against it, but in college it was difficult to rebel against it because I remember a lot of professors that were left-wing saying, of course, if you write this essay and you disagree with me, if you can support it, you'll get an A+. Well, they never did. It never worked that way.
It was a threat, really.
Yeah.
In other words, if you can't support it, according to me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's interesting. I had a very similar experience. I mean, as you talk about this, I recall I was in, I think, 4th grade elementary school.
Yeah.
And we had like a substitute teacher come in. And at the time we were studying history and we were talking about Russia. And this guy came up and said, you're getting it all wrong. The Soviet Union is a great society.
Oh, here you go.
And he went on what can only be described as the most communistic analysis. And I was impressionable we were all 4th grade kids. I remember that I went home after school that day. We had a relative visiting from out of state. And I told her what I had learned. And she almost had a heart attack. Yeah. She was so upset. And I'm like, why are you so upset? This is what we're learning. And I was like, I didn't understand it. I couldn't quite assimilate the information. But that's how they operate. I mean, I think that you have this with like sex education too. They don't tell the parents. They have somebody come in and give a presentation and then they disappear. And it's and it's like a one-time thing, but it has like a bombastic impact. It's like dropping a bomb.
Oh yeah. And then they have perfect deniability. Wow, this was a contractor and we didn't know, and we're sorry.
That's right. Or just and people almost forget it happened. It's like they internalize it, and they're like move on, and it sort of becomes a part of your. It's like as you say, it's like a virus that's embedded into you.
The other thing is that if leftism is a religion, people outside that sphere actually have lives. And it's very easy for me to say, get on school boards and go and complain and so on. But most people don't want to do that. But the problem is that people on the left do want to do that. And this is what changes curriculum. How did Howard Zinn's book get in the schools?
It's a piece of complete poison. And it's worse than a glass half empty. It is negative propaganda. It's classic leftism in that you could say that technically he is not saying anything that is flatly untrue in that book, but the way that it's presented and the way that it's stripped away of any context or any nuance in terms of actually looking at the course of history. I mean, I actually had Howard Zinn on my program. I wish I had
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, I wish I had a tape of it. This is before the days of the internet.
Yeah.
It's when I was first starting out. And I also had Noam Chomsky on quite a few times. And Noam Chomsky actually was a fairly nice guy, but Howard Zinn was the classic leftist revolutionary, angry, arrogant. He had all of the physical features, with the facial tics and the spasms and the cooing and the slurping noises and all the stuff that the communists do. I mean, the man was a walking, talking leftist. It could have been Marx. This is he embodied all of the memes, and he was, how dare you question me? And it was just a totally hostile interview. He never came back, unlike Chomsky, who did come back several times.
How did you get Zinn in the first place?
Well, back in the day, I mean, I was doing the show, I think, at Tufts University, and he probably didn't realize, he thought, he probably didn't realize I'm conservative. And people like to go on the air and debate. It was a little more open back then than it is now. And I could just I think I've mentioned that I did the show at Tufts in, I think it was like 1999, 2000, when I was first getting involved with radio as a hobby. And when I went there, I remember all the talk show hosts were like pierced with blue hair, and everybody was hippies, and there was all very left, but yet it was friendly. And the people they'd come in, they'd debate me. That's when I had Barney Frank on, in fact, whom I eventually ran against in an election.
Yeah.
But people were willing to debate, and they were willing to talk, even if you didn't agree, and even if you sometimes got heated. Mostly it was all a good debate. Sometimes you'd have a few laughs. There was a good, solid dialogue. Then I went, 20 years later, I went back to Tufts. This was...
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did, briefly. This was in, Donald Trump had just been elected. I started like about a month before the election, right? And the atmosphere was completely different. There was no more laughter. There was no more tolerance. There was no one willing to even talk to me, except like Chuck, don't tell me, out of the side of their mouth. Nobody would come on with me. Noam Chomsky wouldn't come on, even though he did back then. And it wasn't me personally. It was just that the atmosphere of intolerance had become so severe. And then I find out, after I was on the air for a few months doing a weekly show, that I was called by a reporter at the college newspaper who said that that somebody had reported me to this sensitivity police. I don't know what they were called. I mean, they like the code police. I don't have a name for it.
Yeah.
It was like a Gestapo. Basically, what happens is that if somebody says something that triggers you, that's unsensitive, that you feel like it was offensive in some way,
oh dear,
you can contact this officer.
Yeah.
And they will then call you in and interrogate you, and you could end up getting, if you're a student, your parents could be called. You could end up being kicked out of school. You could have a demerit on your name. I mean, it's very chilling. It's
what was the statement that you made that so violated?
Well, I had made some comment about Islamic terrorism. I had done the program the day after there was an Islamic attack in Paris.
Yeah.
Right. You might recall this.
Oh, yeah.
And I had described the attack in graphic terms, which is a no-no, apparently. And maybe I shouldn't have. But I was like upset at the time. And I was like, this is something that we ought to be concerned about in the United States. And for that, they said that I'm Islamophobic, and that basically there was some guy listening to me, and he became so upset and agitated that he called them. And they didn't call me in because, I'm not a student. I mean, and I don't care. I'm a citizen. They allow community hosts to come in and do shows every so often. But what they did do was they took my time slot and they moved it to 3:00 in the morning. So, they just deep sixed me in that way. And I would go at 3:00 in the morning, but eventually I said, F this, I'm not going to continue.
3:00 in the morning. You were very bad.
Yeah, well, I think it was 4:00 in the morning, actually. So it was like the graveyard. And it's just the thing was so lacking in in humor. It's like, even if I did say something wrong, you'd think that maybe somebody could have mentioned it to me, and I could have, I really was going out of my way to observe community standards. And it was probably something that you'd hear normally in other talk shows. It was pretty mild.
Yeah, they were just looking for something.
Yeah, that's right. But that to me explained what's going on in school today. It was like I was Rumpelstiltskin in the great Washington Irving novel. It's like I had been asleep for 20 years, and he wakes up.
No, Rip Van Winkle.
Rip Van Winkle. Thank you.
You're mixing stories here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, he's asleep for 20 years in hibernation, and then he wakes up, and suddenly it's a different world.
Yeah.
So I had this Rorschach examination of Tufts, which I think is typical of all colleges, give or take. Maybe Tufts might be a little more radical, but it was like night and day. So that's what's going on now. You don't have students coming up and engaging in vigorous debate anymore. They're afraid, and I understand that. I don't blame them. You got these Gestapo-like policemen who could destroy you, who could, your parents are spending 60, 70 grand a year for you to go to this place. So you keep your head low. You don't do anything that's going to get you in trouble. And most of them have internalized this anyways, even before getting there. They're in the program. They know what's correct and what's not correct. They just have learned it. They've internalized it, and they're not even conscious of it. I've seen this, and they and yet you see if somebody does step out of line, an extreme, even hysterical reaction. And I think that what they need to do every so often, which they tried to do to me with this article that was very, very nasty, I must say, is that they'll hold somebody up and do what back in the Spanish Inquisition they'd call an auto da fe.
Yeah.
You bring them out in public and humiliate them and flog them and make them confess and basically kill them. And they do that every so often to somebody who steps out of line, somebody who expresses an opinion that's not part of the leftist, decalogue. And as a way to threaten everybody, because people see that and they see the article that was written about me in that paper, and they're like, oh, and by the way, I republished it on my blog site. I have no problem with it. But the thing is that they're like, oh, look what they've done to him. If they can do that to him, they can do it to me. It's a very kind of threatening internal thing. If I say this,
that was certainly the most operandi for Trump. The way,
oh yeah,
I mean, if Trump could be taken out in this manner,
yeah. Well, if I don't know if TikTok is any example, but I do a TikTok every morning, a quick 30-second interview, talk about where I see with the election going, and I'd pick up maybe 4 or 5 followers, and maybe I had a few minor surges. I got like 20 followers. All of a sudden, last Sunday morning, I did a TikTok, nothing unusual, but I ended up getting 2,000 followers. And it was like blowing out of the wind, the whole thing. And now I can go live on TikTok and do a little more of a long-term talk because
what did you do to get 2,000 all at once?
I just did what I did every day. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I talk about the voter fraud and I talk about the election, but it wasn't anything that was different than I had done all the other times. For some reason, it triggered something. It took off, and once you reach 1,000 followers, you can go live. So now I'm up to 2,000 followers, and I'm going live, and it's fun. It's interesting. But the thing I've noticed, because people send in texts and I can read them and answer them, it's almost like a talk show. But I've noticed that in the past couple, it's kind of a Rorschach, because in the past couple of days, the emails I'm getting or the texts I'm getting from other TikTok people are getting really nasty and really personal. And, there's like how, you're this, that, and the other thing. I mean, stuff that's, not kind. And what that tells me is that there's at least some few shreds of conscience buried inside of them, that they do realize that this is a fraud, and they do realize that I'm right. And so they suddenly have this intense need to tear me down and to make sure that I'm not heard. I had one guy actually say, you should not be allowed to be on TikTok. I mean, it was very threatening. It's like, you don't deserve it because you're spreading misinformation. And I tried to be reasonable about it. I'm like, well, fine. Can you give me an example? I understand you don't agree with me, but I wouldn't want you taken down. It's like, but they're not reasonable. It's not like something you can discuss rationally. They're having a meltdown. There are people who are just, their heads are exploding. And that tells me that either one of two things, either that they're upset that they're starting to dawn on them that I am right and they do have some awareness, or that Trump is winning, that he is going to do this. And if he does do it and he is reelected, holy crap, can you imagine? That's going to be a glorious day. And it's going to set people off in a way that we have never seen. It's going to be just, I mean, I don't even want to think about it because it would be so great. I mean, it would be so exciting. I mean, I'd love this. I mean, it would be like, yes, justice is done. And, at people's core, people want justice done. They want the truth to come out. They understand that there are lies. Nobody wants to live a lie. And some people might live a lie their entire life, and they're probably pretty miserable people too. But average people who are sucked into this, they still have a nagging little something going on in the back of their heads telling them to wake up. And that's all I'm saying to people.
Yeah,
wake up. Do your own research. I'm telling people that they're like, there's no fraud. I'm like, okay, take off your ideological blinders and just do a little homework for yourself. Don't listen to what people are saying. Go, listen to a couple of YouTubes. Listen to the interview given with Sidney Powell. I know that she's now an enemy of the people. I get that. But she did give an interview. I don't know if it's still on YouTube. I hope it is. But she gave an interview with a reporter from the Epoch Times that is carried by Eric Metaxas. His was, I don't know if you know who he is.
Yes.
He's excellent. He's very, very good. And he carries the entire interview. And if you listen to it, it is extremely compelling. She lays out exactly what's happened. And she does so in a really dramatic way. So, I just say, people, look, I can't go into on a TikTok the details of the voter fraud. You're going to have to do your own research. But I would ask you to, even quietly, you don't even need to tell anybody. I don't want to get you in trouble. Don't even tell your girlfriend, or don't tell your parents, don't mention it at school. Just in the privacy of your own home, do a little homework and try to think a little bit on your own, a little independently. That's all I ask these people to do.
Well, I suspect that there are some people on that side that are disenchanted. They certainly see who's been elected, or supposedly.
Yeah.
You have this corrupt old guy who seems to be in poor health, is probably in some stage of dementia. And the vice president for him is no prize. I mean, there are very few lovers of Kamala Harris.
No. And again, I mean, I tell people, take a look what she did to Black people in California. The numbers of men she put in prison for minor crimes because she was in bed with the private prison system. I mean, we're talking about somebody who has no scruples, no inner core, no basic moral standard. It's just whatever is needed to accomplish whatever goal whoever's controlling her at any given time. I mean, you want to talk racism. Take a look at what she did to the parents of these people. I mean, there's some stories about her that are horrendous. Everyone knows this in California.
Well, that's why she couldn't break 1 or 2% during the primary season.
Right. It's disgusting. I don't even want to think about it. That's too depressing. I'm not prepared. I mean, I'm getting, as I mentioned, people who want to come on the show, who want to talk about, and these are conservatives. We want to criticize this Biden appointee or that person. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just not going to go there. I'm not going to have that conversation. I'm not prepared for it yet. It's not over yet. And while I hope that President Trump doesn't have to take those extraordinary measures we talked about, he very well may have to do it, because we can't have a stolen election in this country. Otherwise, we don't have a system of laws. We have to have, and I've mentioned to people who tell me, oh, there's no evidence. Do you want to see an investigation then, given the fact that 60% of the American people think that there is evidence? What about having a reasonable, dispassionate investigation? And that's all. I mean, if they do that in the states that we're talking about, and it turns out that there really wasn't a sufficient amount of voter fraud, or it turns out that Biden actually did win, then I'll accept that. It's just, but what about the investigation? There is so much information now. There is so much suspicion. There is such a big cloud over this election. And it's not something that was just manufactured by Trump or anyone else.
Oh, no.
It's quite real. That I would ask people who think that I'm crazy here just to join me in a demand that this be investigated in these states. Where are the attorneys generals? Where are the state legislatures, the governors in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona? Where are they? Where are the Republicans? They're worthless.
No one wants to be the first to step up besides Mo Brooks, because life goes on. And
yeah, they're just we don't care. And they hate Trump anyways.
Yeah.
These establishment people like Mitt Romney. Oh my God! I mean, what a disappointment. When he was governor of Massachusetts, I met him a few times. I admired him, but I think what's happened to Mitt Romney is basically that he completely choked in his run against Obama. Talk about election fraud. There was evidence of it back then. You had the this Dominion software scandal goes back probably at least 10 or 15 years. This isn't new. And Romney knew it and did not a goddamn thing about it. He just let it go. So now he's bitter. Now he looks at Trump and he's like, here you are, you accomplished it. You got elected. And it's just sour grapes. It's a disgusting thing to watch. It's really a disgrace.
Yeah, I mean, I just got a little news clip here from your friend Steve Charlie.
Oh, yeah, great man.
Says Republicans uprising as GOP defies Turtle Man, Mitch McConnell. So
yeah, exactly. Oh no, he's doing a great job. He's been on my show a few times. Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's going to come on again. I think he's busy with his own thing. I get that, but even he is, I think, hedging his bets a little bit. I mean, he's moving on just slightly. I notice he's now talking about, the nationalist revolution and how it's going to go on. So I think that he's kind of adjusting a little. And I say that with due respect, because he's been a great and stellar stand-up guy when it comes to researching voter fraud. And he's continuing with it. But I think he's kind of, I mean, this is what I'm seeing. I mean, it's a psychological thing. I mean, people are like, okay, we've heard enough. And I think that the Supreme Court betrayal was, in a way, a major blow. And, it's going to be harder and harder every day to overcome it. Yeah, this is why Trump has to take action now.
If there's any amount of scruples in those three, they're going to have to take a look at the Sidney Powell cases.
Exactly. And that's going to be a tough one, because she's already being demonized. And but she's got the goods. I mean, this Kraken is just that. It's a sensational thing. It needs to be completely aired. And they talk about that there have been 50 cases thrown out by courts. They have been thrown out, but not because of the evidence. They've been thrown out on technicalities. People have to understand how the court system works. When a case is brought, they look, this, even the Supreme Court, oh, well, this isn't the right jurisdiction, which, by the way, was crap, because it was.
Well, of course, that's what do they call that? Original jurisdiction?
Yeah.
It doesn't get any more basic than one state suing another.
I mean, if they were so against jurisdiction, they never would have declared prayer in school to be illegal, because that was not the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. That was a state question. But putting that aside, that's old history. The fact is that all of these cases, which are brought by people usually in these states who feel that they've been disenfranchised, that they've been suppressed, and that they weren't allowed to vote, and they bring these cases, the cases are not thrown out because the judge actually hears the evidence. It doesn't get that far.
No.
They just throw it out because, well, they didn't write the right signature, or they didn't have the right address at this day, or they didn't do this. They didn't do, they find a little.
Or you don't have the standing.
Yeah, or there's some, they'll get some little shred of something that allows them to dismiss the case. So the result is that we as a public never actually get to hear the evidence.
No.
And it's because they know that if the evidence is heard, it's going to be big. And it is there. The Supreme Court really, as a matter of moral basis, ought to allow this evidence to finally be heard in its proper format, which is in a court. Not in some book that Sidney Powell writes a year from now. I'm sure she will, and I'm sure it'll lay it out, and it'll be great. But it's not going to be, it's going to be history. I mean, it has to be heard in public during a debate that is witnessed by everyone while people are under oath, and while there's testimony and there's cross-examination and everything is aired. It has to be done.
Here's the other thing. People don't have the stomach for it. One of the reasons I'm convinced that nothing ever happened to Hillary Clinton was that whoever it was got together in the Star Chamber and said, look, she's as dirty as they come. But how's it going to help if we expose a major presidential candidate as being a criminal? And this has a good history in that all the sex scandals in the church, the original reasoning was, well, yes, this is going on, but it's going to bring such great scandal. Let's move this guy over here. But the problem was they couldn't play whack-a-mole quickly enough. There were too many of these guys, and you start covering up everything, and then it all
implodes. Once you start down there, what happens is you get a two-tiered system of justice.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Hillary Clinton example is a good one. I mean, James Comey, who, by the way, is a real friend of this whole conspiracy. He's one of the core practitioners. He gave that press conference where he laid out her crimes, and that was only the tip of the iceberg. But nevertheless, he laid out public crimes that would have put anyone else up the hoosegow.
Yeah.
And then he finishes the press conference by saying, we have nevertheless decided that we're not going to prosecute. We're not going to recommend prosecution.
That was another one of these, hey, it's in your face.
Yeah.
You can't do anything.
And we're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
We're just going to leave it there. And it gave her deniability. And, and she continued to ride on that dime. I mean, hey, I was exonerated,
Yeah. I mean, maybe somebody didn't want to be Arkansas.
Yes, exactly. Meanwhile, the Mueller committee comes out with a report completely exonerating President Trump of this really Vakafta conspiracy theory that he had been spying for Russia, which is an ugly, false lie, the biggest conspiracy theory of my lifetime. And yet they would not go far as to say he's been exonerated. Instead, they try to create a little cloud.
Well, okay.
Oh, but we think he might have obstructed justice. Why did he obstruct justice? Because he criticized them.
Yeah.
That's obstructing justice.
Go back to your friend Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Dexter White, et cetera, et cetera. All right. It eventually came out, although there's still people that
there's still stuff that's classified about that.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this to you when I was going to write a book about Harry Dexter White, and I was in Washington. I was there. My wife was there for some business. I went with her, and I went to the National Archives to do some research, and I discovered that there's still, you still have to go through Freedom of Information to get information about Harry Dexter White. Now, this is something that happened in the 1940s. We're talking about almost 100 years ago. There's no reason to keep that classified. I mean,
what had happened was that they like the illusion, okay, and this is where I think was the downfall of Joe McCarthy. Right. No one can seriously argue that the Army was not compromised, at least in the Signal Corps and in probably other places. But to admit this is not good.
It would have brought down the whole rotten house of cards, and that's why they had to destroy McCarthy.
Yeah,
That's why, I mean, this is what Whittaker Chambers did in the trial of the century when he
yeah,
exposed Alger Hiss. It was, and Nixon was the lawyer, by the way, there as a young congressman. And
yeah.
I think that that's why Nixon eventually was removed from office. I think that was Mona Charen who did a good column about that. It really left an impact on me. She said that the left will lie in wait,
Yeah.
you know, even if it takes 20, 30 years.
Now she kind of went bad.
Oh, she did totally. And I've emailed her. She's completely flipped to the other side. But
What is the deal with her? What happened?
she's gone bitter. I mean, I don't know, these anti-Trumpers, it's like they're not sane. I mean, it's worse than the Democrats. They're completely demented. I'm sorry. I mean, and with all due respect, you know, you look at that Lincoln Project.
Oh,
It was worse propaganda than anything you would hear out of the Democratic side. Their whole argument was, well, Trump is a mean person. He said something mean. He hurt someone's feelings. You know, forget conservative values. These are people that are holding themselves up as Republicans. That's how they start their speeches. They did. I don't know if you saw the 60-minute segment on them. It was disgusting. I mean, they're like, we have always stood for conservative Republican values, blah, blah, blah. And then they launch into this attack on Trump, not because he wasn't a good conservative, and he's been the best conservative president since Coolidge, but because he had said something insulting, or he said something mean, or he didn't look the right way at someone. It was the most disgusting display of
well,
crap.
this is the legacy of Nelson Rockefeller.
Yeah, and it's completely empty. It's completely vacant, and it's worse than, I mean, it's really worse than George Soros almost. I mean, not that anything could be worse than that, but it's subversive, and it's just, and it didn't work. I mean, they completely flopped, and you know, the Republicans got behind Trump in a big way, including liberal Republicans. These people are like out to lunch, and Mona Charen unfortunately seems to be a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it was that turned her. This is a number of years ago. I believe it was actually before Trump.
I think he probably, because he might have made a few insulting comments about women, might have done it.
Oh, there you go.
You know, I mean, it's like, come on. I mean, I get the fact that he's not always the most couth person, but you know, I mean, you have to kind of put the interest of the country first, and the interest of what's really happening first.
Well, I would think so.
You would think so, especially from someone who has, like Mona Charen, who actually has a half a brain, but whatever.
Yeah.
So, but Mike, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think the most likely course is Mo Brooks finding a counterpart in the Senate. There's the chance that one of those Supreme Court cases could still get heard. And I'll tell you this, even if Biden is given the oath, this movement is not going to stop.
No.
In fact, his presidency is likely going to be quite undermined by all this stuff going on. He's going to have no credibility. That's not going to go away.
And it's not good for the country. And I also would suggest that even if, God forbid, he is sworn in as president, we have to continue to investigate the voter fraud. We have to continue to investigate the Dominion software, because if they got away with it now, they'll get away with it again. They have to get rid of those goddamn machines. We have to hand count the vote in the United States, in the precincts where they're cast, with two people watching, both a Democrat and a Republican, and you have to have national voter ID. You just have to. Every vote should be, we should go back to the principle of one man, one vote. I mean, you listen to Sidney Powell's presentation. I mean, she talks about how the voting machines were set up to average votes. In other words, like every Biden vote got like, 2.3. Every Trump vote got 1.7. So in other words, if the Trump votes had reached over the 1.7, they'd be either switched or thrown out, and the Biden votes would just stay there until they hit their peak. Now, if anyone doubts that, you know, that's obvious. I mean, this is how society works now. You look at a high school, you know, where you have a student who is excelling and getting good grades. They don't get the good grade anymore. Now what they do is they average the class.
Yes.
So that, you know, an A becomes a B, and an F becomes a D, and they find like a meme. They find like a mean, like the middle ground, so that everybody kind of averages out. That's how things are done now. That's how things are done now. That's a leftist idea. That's how things are done in many areas in our life. So to think that's not happening in the electronic voting
Well, I mean,
is naive at best.
of course, that whole paradigm is absurd on its face because, as I said on a couple of shows, it's just simply a database. It's a counting database. It's the easiest thing in the world. There should be no module that lets you do anything other than count this. That's all. You don't need
that's
all
right.
these.
We don't need any of it. And I mean, this is how they came up with global warming, not to get into another topic, but it's all computer projections and data analysis. What?
Well, it's models.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not saying it's untrue, but the point is that what we know about it is based upon these averages and these data points.
It's not empirical science.
That's right. But to do this to a vote is unconscionable. Every single last vote is counted with its own integrity. That is the closest thing that we have in our secular republic to a sacred act. Every single vote has to be equal. Well, it has to be individually counted. There is no other excuse for any of this.
How far that goes back?
Well, there's always been voter fraud. I get that. You know, in a way, we're returning to some very dark times. People might note, if you look at the history of voting in this country, back in the early part of the republic, in many states, people voted in public. They didn't have a private booth. Right. They would go to a local hall and they would have people raise their hands. And if you raised your hand and you were voting for the wrong guy, you could end up getting your head bashed in. I mean, this is how, the novelist John Fenneman Cooper, who wrote Last of the Mohicans, his father was killed because he was supporting the wrong candidate and he raised his hand in a public venue when they were voting. So, I mean, the whole movement to bring about the private secret vote, the voting booth, was a progressive movement, and it was something that didn't come around easily. It took a long time to achieve that, and what this whole machine does is it's destroyed that. You know, your vote now goes into a database where it can be manipulated by people. It's no longer the vote cast and counted. I mean, it really is a return to a darker time. I mean, this isn't, this is something that I mean, the fact that liberals and the left, in a way, are so silent about this is really telling. I remember back, I think it was in 2009 or back then, you had liberal left-wing talk show hosts like Tom Hartman and David Pakman and Schultz, what's his name? They did show after show. Who?
Ed Schultz.
Ed Schultz. They did program after program after program about voter fraud and about the machines being controlled by Republicans, big money, corporate interests and all of this. Now you don't hear a friggin' peep out of them.
No.
They didn't care. It's all situational. The fact that you hear nothing out of them tells you everything you need to know about this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Well, we just have to keep following it.
Yeah, we do.
And see where it leads us. In the only comment I'll make on the healthcare side is I'm a little bit disturbed with the, although they're certainly not a high number, but the side effects on the Pfizer vaccine are not pleasing to hear.
Really? What's going on?
Three cases of Bell's palsy coming out of the clinical trials, which will give you some pause. I mean, I can understand how if you have an immune overreaction and you may feel some flu symptoms for a day or whatever it is, but this Bell's palsy thing is a little crazy. And even what's this guy's name? Paul Offit, who
he's very pro-vaccine.
Yeah, Mr. Fanboy for vaccines is now raising a bit of just say, look, I'm concerned about this.
Okay.
So
well, that's concerning because he's been pushing vaccines for decades.
Oh, no, I mean, and I just, there's going to be problems with vaccines, but I think there's a dose issue with this. That's my personal opinion. Moderna doesn't, well, we haven't heard much about their clinical trials. So who knows?
Well, their thing is about to go on the market.
That's
I
right.
think next week.
Next week, it's opening up. They have the extreme advantage of not requiring this ridiculous cold storage situation. So we'll just have to see. But it's going to be a long time
Oh boy, yeah.
before you or me even are going to have access to this.
Right. So at least we'll get to, unfortunately, see whether or not it pans out. I mean, it's sad to say that.
Well, I mean, look,
There's also stories about it affecting female fertility.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah. There's so, and whether these are stories, whether it's happened, but the logistic of it is insane. You have 330 million people in the country. They have 3 million doses. So, I mean, do the math. It's going to take a while.
Right. Okay.
So,
well, we'll have to pick up the chords on that one next week.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and some of these COVID restrictions. In the meantime,
keep agitating and keep praying.
Yeah, that's about all I can do.
Yeah, and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you very much, and Happy Hanukkah.
And Merry Christmas. I celebrate Christmas in a secular way.
Well,
and even though I'm Jewish, I honor Jesus, because I think that had it not been for Jesus and his ministry, we would never have had a United States.
Well, he was the greatest Jew of all time, so that's
exactly. And he brought the Jewish covenant, the Torah, to the world. And those are the laws that found this country. So I honor Jesus. I view Jesus as American in that reason. So I'm happy to celebrate his birth.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right. So, Mike, I'll talk to you next week.
All right. See you then.